A rifle is a firearm designed to be fired from the shoulder, with a barrel that has a helical groove or pattern of grooves cut into the barrel walls. The raised areas of the rifling are called lands, which make contact with the projectile, imparting spin around an axis corresponding to the orientation of the weapon. When the projectile leaves the barrel, this spin lends gyroscopic stability to the projectile and prevents tumbling, in the same way that a properly thrown American football or rugby ball behaves. This allows the use of aerodynamically efficient pointed bullets and thus improves range and accuracy. Typically, a bullet is propelled by the contained deflagration of an explosive compound, although other means such as compressed air are used in air rifles, which are popular for vermin control, hunting small game, formal, target shooting and casual shooting. Terminology. Formerly, rifles only fired a single projectile with each squeeze of the trigger. Modern rifles are capable of firing more than one round per trigger squeeze. Some fire in a fully automatic mode and others are limited to fixed bursts of 2, 3, or more rounds per squeeze. Thus, modern automatic rifles overlap to some extent in design and function with machine guns. In fact, many light machine guns are adaptations of existing automatic rifle designs. A military's light machine guns are typically chambered for the same caliber ammunition as its service rifles. Generally, the difference between an automatic rifle and a machine gun comes down to weight, cooling system, and ammunition feed system. Rifles, with their relatively lighter components and smaller capacity magazines, are incapable of sustained automatic fire in the way that machine guns are. They trade this capability in favor of increased mobility. Modern military rifles are fed by box magazines, while machine guns are generally belt-fed. Many machine guns allow the operator to quickly exchange barrels in order to prevent overheating, whereas rifles generally do not. Most machine guns fire from an open bolt in order to reduce the danger of cook-off, while almost all rifles fire from a closed bolt for superior accuracy. Machine guns are often crewed by more than one soldier. The rifle is an individual weapon. The term rifle is sometimes used to describe larger crew-served rifled weapons firing explosive shells, for example, recoilless rifles. In many works of fiction, a rifle refers to any weapon that has a stock and is shouldered before firing, even if the weapon is not rifled or does not fire solid projectiles. Historical overview. The origins of rifling are difficult to trace, but some of the earliest practical experiments seem to have occurred in Europe during the 15th century. Archers had long realized that a twist added to the tail feathers of their arrows gave them greater accuracy. Early muskets produced large quantities of smoke and soot, which had to be cleaned from the action and bore of the musket frequently, either through the action of repeated bore scrubbing, or a deliberate attempt to create soot grooves that would allow for more shots to be fired from the firearm. This might also have led to a perceived increase in accuracy, although no one knows for sure. True rifling dates from the mid-15th century. Although military commanders preferred smoothbore weapons for infantry use because rifles were much more prone to problems due to powder fouling their barrel and because they took longer to reload and fire than muskets, rifles were created as an improvement in the accuracy of smoothbore muskets. In the early 18th century, Benjamin Robbins, an English mathematician, realized that an elongated bullet would retain the momentum and kinetic energy of a musket ball, but would slice through the air with greater ease. The black powder used in early muzzle-loading rifles quickly fouled the barrel, making loading slower and more difficult. Their greater range was also considered to be of little practical use, since the smoke from black powder quickly obscured the battlefield and made it almost impossible to target the enemy from a distance. Since musketeers could not afford to take the time to stop and clean the barrels in the middle of a battle, rifles were limited to use by sharpshooters and non-military users like hunting. Muskets were smoothbore, large-caliber weapons using ball-shaped ammunition fired at relatively low velocity. Due to the high cost and great difficulty of precision manufacturing, and the need to load readily from the muzzle, the musket ball was a loose fit in the barrel. Consequently, on firing the ball bounced off the sides of the barrel when fired, and the final direction on leaving the muzzle was unpredictable. Muskets had to be long, so the muzzles of the rear rank's muskets projected well forward of the faces of the front rank. The performance of early muskets was effective for the styles of warfare at the time, whereby soldiers tended to stand in long, stationary lines and fire at the opposing forces. Precise aiming and accuracy were not necessary to hit an opponent. Muskets were used for comparatively rapid, imprecisely aimed volley fire, and the average soldier could be easily trained to use them. The rifle was originally a sharpshooter's weapon used for targets of opportunity and deliberately aimed fire, first gaining notoriety in warfare during the 7 Years' War and American War for Independence through their use by American frontiersmen. Later, during the Napoleonic Wars, the British 95th Regiment and 60th Regiment, as well as American sharpshooters and riflemen during the War of 1812, used the rifle to great effect during skirmishing. Because of a slower loading time than a musket, they were not adopted by the whole army. Since rifles were used by sharpshooters who did not routinely fire over other men's shoulders, long length was not required to avoid the forward line. A shorter length made a handier weapon in which tight-fitting balls did not have to be rammed so far down the barrel. The invention of the mini-balls in the 1840s solved the slow loading problem, and in the 1850s and 1860s rifles quickly replaced muskets on the battlefield. Many rifles, often referred to as rifled muskets, were very similar to the muskets they replaced, but the military also experimented with other designs. Breech-loading weapons proved to have a much faster rate of fire than muzzleloaders, causing military forces to abandon muzzle loaders in favor of breech-loading designs in the late 1860s. In the later part of the 19th century, rifles were generally single-shot, breech-loading, designed for aimed, discretionary fire by individual soldiers. Then, as now, rifles had a stock, either fixed or folding, to be braced against the shoulder when firing. The adoption of cartridges and breech-loading in the 19th century was concurrent with the general adoption of rifles. In the early part of the 20th century, soldiers were trained to shoot accurately over long ranges with high-powered cartridges. World War I Lee-Enfield rifles were equipped with long-range, volley sights for mass firing at ranges of up to 1.6 kilometers. Individual shots were unlikely to hit, but a platoon firing repeatedly could produce a beaten ground effect similar to light artillery or machine guns, but experience in World War I showed that long-range fire was best left to the machine gun. Currently, rifles are the most common firearm in general use for hunting purposes. Rifles derived from military designs have long been popular with civilian shooters. 19th century. During the Napoleonic Wars, the British Army created several experimental units known as rifles, armed with the Baker rifle. These rifle regiments were deployed as skirmishers during the Peninsular War in Spain and Portugal, and were more effective than skirmishers armed with muskets due to their accuracy and long range. Muzzle loading. Gradually, rifles appeared with cylindrical barrels cut with helical grooves, the surfaces between the grooves being lands. The innovation shortly preceded the mass adoption of breech-loading weapons, as it was not practical to push an overbore bullet down through a rifled barrel, only to then fire it back out. The dirt and grime from prior shots was pushed down ahead of a tight bullet or ball, and, of course, loading was far more difficult, as the lead had to be deformed to go down in the first place, reducing the accuracy due to deformation. Several systems were tried to deal with the problem, usually by resorting to an underbore bullet that expanded upon firing. The original muzzle-loading rifle, with a closely fitting ball to take the rifle in grooves, was loaded with difficulty, particularly when foul, and for this reason was not generally used for military purposes. Even with the advent of rifling, the bullet itself didn't change, but was wrapped in a greased cloth patch to grip the rifle in grooves. The first half of the 19th century saw a distinct change in the shape and function of the bullet. In 1826, Delvin, a French infantry officer, invented a breech with abrupt shoulders on which a spherical bullet was rammed down until it caught the rifle in grooves. Delvin's method, however, deformed the bullet and was inaccurate. Soon after, the carabiner TIGE was invented by Louis Etienne de Thouvenin, which provided for a stem at the bottom of the barrel that would deform and expand the base of the bullet when rammed, therefore enabling accurate contact with the rifling. However, the area around the stem would clog and get dirty easily. Minié system, the rifled musket. One of the most famous was the Minié system, invented by French Army Captain Claude Etienne Minié, which relied on a conical bullet with a hollow skirt at the base of the bullet. When fired, the skirt would expand from the pressure of the exploding charge and grip the rifling as the round was fired. The better seal gave more power, as less gas escaped past the bullet, which combined with the fact that for the same bore diameter a long bullet was heavier than a round ball. The extra grip also spun the bullet more consistently, which increased the range from about 50 yards for a smoothbore musket to about 300 yards for a rifle using the Minié system. The expanding skirt of the Minié ball also solved the problem that earlier tight-fitting bullets were difficult to load as black powder residue fouled the inside of the barrel. The Minié system allowed conical bullets to be loaded into rifles just as quickly as round balls in smoothbores, which allowed rifle muskets to replace muskets on the battlefield. Minié system rifles, notably the U.S. Springfield and the British Enfield of the early 1860s, featured prominently in the U.S. Civil War, due to their enhanced power and accuracy. Over the 19th century, bullet design also evolved, the bullets becoming gradually smaller and lighter. By 1910 the standard blunt-nosed bullet had been replaced with the pointed, Spitzer bullet, an innovation that increased range and penetration. Cartridge design evolved from simple paper tubes containing black powder and shot, to sealed brass cases with integral primers for ignition. While black powder itself was replaced with cordite, and then other nitrocellulose-based smokeless powder mixtures, propelling bullets to higher velocities than before. The increased velocity meant that new problems arrived, and so bullets went from being soft lead to harder lead, then to copper jacketed. In order to better engage the spiral grooves without stripping them in the same way that a screw or bolt thread would be stripped if subjected to extreme forces. Breech loading. From 1836, breech-loading rifles were introduced with the German Draso needle gun, and followed by the French tabatier in 1857, the British Kalischer and Terry carbine made in Birmingham, and later in 1864 and the more well-known British Snyder Enfield. Primitive chamber locking mechanisms were soon replaced by bolt-action mechanisms, exemplified by the Chassepot in 1866. Breech-loading was to have a major impact on warfare, as breech-loading rifles can be fired at a rate many times higher than muzzle-loaded rifles and significantly can be loaded from a prone rather than standing position. Firing prone is more accurate than firing from a standing position, while a prone rifleman presents a much smaller target than a standing soldier. The higher accuracy and range, combined with reduced vulnerability, generally benefited the defense while making the traditional battle between lines of standing and volleying infantrymen obsolete. Revolving rifles were an attempt to increase the rate of fire of rifles by combining them with the revolving firing mechanism that had been developed earlier for revolving pistols. Colt began experimenting with revolving rifles in the early 19th century. and other manufacturers like Remington later experimented with them as well. The Colt revolving rifle Model 1855 was an early repeating rifle and the first one to be used by the U.S. government, and saw some limited action during the American Civil War. Revolvers, both rifles and pistols, tend to spray fragments of metal from the front of the cylinder. This is not a problem for pistols, since both of the shooter's hands are behind the cylinder. A rifleman needs to have one hand in front of the cylinder to balance the weapon, and as a result, would end up with shards of metal sprayed at high velocity into his forearm. Cap-and-ball type revolvers were also prone to chain fire, which again was more of a problem for rifles since the rifleman's arm was in front of the cylinder. These undesirable characteristics severely limited the revolving rifle's popularity. Cartridge storage. An important area of development was the way that cartridges were stored and used in the weapon. The Spencer repeating rifle was a breech-loading manually operated lever-action rifle that was adopted by the United States. Over 20,000 were used during the American Civil War. It marks the first adoption of a removable magazine-fed infantry rifle by any country. The design was completed by Christopher Spencer in 1860. It used copper rimfire cartridges stored in a removable 7-round tube magazine, enabling the rounds to be fired one after another. When the magazine was empty, it could be exchanged for another. 20th century. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904–1905 was the first modern war of the 20th century. Military observers from Great Britain, Germany, France, and the United States witnessed firsthand the first major conflict fought with high-velocity bolt-action rifles firing smokeless powder on a massive scale. The Battle of Mukden, fought in 1905, consisted of nearly 343,000 Russian troops against over 281,000 Japanese troops. The Russian Mosin Nagant Model 1891 in 7.62 mm was pitted against the Japanese Arisaka Type 30 bolt-action rifle in 6.5 mm. Each had velocities well over the 19th century black powder velocities of under 2,000 feet per second. Until the early 20th century, rifles tended to be very long. An 1890 Martini Henry was almost 2 meters in length with a fixed bayonet. The demand for more compact weapons for cavalrymen led to the carbine, or shortened rifle. The advent of massed, rapid firepower of the machine gun, submachine gun and the rifled artillery piece was so quick as to outstrip the development of any way to attack a trench defended by riflemen and machine gunners. The carnage of World War I was perhaps the greatest vindication and vilification of the rifle as a military weapon. During and after World War II, it became accepted that most infantry engagements occur at ranges of less than 300 meters. The range and power of the large battle rifles was overkill, and the weapons were heavier than the ideal. This led to Germany's development of the 7.92 by 33 mm Kurz round, the MKB-42, and ultimately, the assault rifle. Today, an infantryman's rifle is optimized for ranges of 300 meters or less, and soldiers are trained to deliver individual rounds or bursts of fire within these distances. Typically, the application of accurate, long-range fire is the domain of the marksman and the sniper in warfare, and of enthusiastic target shooters in peacetime. The modern marksman rifle and sniper rifle are usually capable of accuracy better than 0.3 mrad at 100 yards. 3D printed rifle. The Grizzly is a 3D printed, 22 caliber rifle created around August 2013. It was created using a Stratasys Dimension 1200S printer. It was created by a Canadian only known by the pseudonym Matthew, who told The Verge that he is in his late 20s, and his main job is making tools for the construction industry. The original Grizzly fired one shot then broke. Grizzly 2.0 fired 14 bullets before getting damaged due to the strain. According to the Daily Mail, the Grizzly 2.0 performed so well that the inventor, Matthew, was able to put it to his shoulder and shot off 3 rounds with the rifle pressed against his cheek without hurting him. Youth rifle. A youth rifle is a rifle designed or modified for fitting children, or small-framed shooters. A youth rifle is often a single-shot, .22 caliber rifle, or a bolt-action rifle, although some youth rifles are semi-automatic. They are usually very light, with a greatly shortened length of pull, which is necessary to accommodate children. Youth stocks are available for many popular rifles, such as the Ruger 10-20, a semi-automatic, .22 LR rifle, allowing a youth rifle to be made from a standard rifle by simply changing the stock. The typical ages of shooters for such rifles vary from about age 5 to 11 years old.